In the middle of the year 2025, just after the United Nations General Assembly concluded in New York, two men unexpectedly crossed paths in a quiet side corridor, a place with no camera lenses, no press briefings, and no prepared statements. One was IBRAHIM Traoré, the military leader of Burkina Faso forged through coups, armed conflict, and the struggle of a nation striving to reclaim genuine sovereignty. The other was Zohran Kwame Mamdani, an elected lawmaker from Queens, New York, navigating faith, democracy, and personal identity within one of the most complex pluralistic societies in the world. They share African roots, they share the Islamic faith, but beyond those points of intersection, everything else, the systems they serve, the power they hold, and the risks they face, stands in stark contrast. This was not a polite conversation. The atmosphere was tense, the words deliberate, and every argument reached into deep philosophical and political layers. At the center of this dialogue lay a sensitive question that many choose to avoid. Is Islam in modern politics a source of real power, or merely an identity that is accepted, so long as it never challenges the existing order? If you want to approach the answer in a neutral, unbiased way, press like and join us as we follow this dialogue in its entirety. To understand why IBRAHIM Traoré speaks about Islam the way he does, one must first understand the ground beneath his feet. Burkina Faso is not a theoretical debate space. It is a nation that, for more than a decade, has lived under constant pressure from armed insurgency, political instability, and foreign influence. In this environment, belief is not abstract. It is lived, tested, and often weaponized by enemies and allies alike. By the time IBRAHIM Traoré emerged as the country's leader, Burkina Faso had already endured more than 2 military coups in the year 2022 alone. Each uprising reflected the same frustration: a government unable to protect its people, borders collapsing under militant pressure, and international partners offering statements instead of solutions. According to United Nations assessments released in 2023, more than 40% of the country's territory had, at various points, fallen under the influence of extremist armed groups. Villages were emptied, schools closed, roads became unsafe after sunset. In this reality, religion did not exist only inside mosques. Islam shaped daily discipline, social trust, and communal survival. Roughly 60% of the population identifies as Muslim, not as a political statement, but as inherited structure, one that predates the modern state itself. When Traoré speaks of Islam, he does so as someone governing a society where belief has never been optional, symbolic, or safely separated from life and death. A defining moment came in the year 2023, when French forces formally withdrew from Burkina Faso, ending nearly a decade of military presence. For many Western observers, this was framed as a security risk. For many Burkinabe citizens, it was seen as a necessary rupture, an attempt to reclaim dignity after years of dependency that had failed to stop violence. This moment reshaped African news coverage across the continent, placing IBRAHIM Traoré at the center of a wider Sahelian realignment. Traoré's message during this period was consistent. Sovereignty, he argued, could not coexist with permanent reliance on foreign protection. National reform required discipline, unity, and moral grounding. In his speeches, Islam was never presented as a tool of domination, but as a source of internal order, a framework capable of holding communities together when institutions had collapsed. This stance placed Burkina Faso on a collision course with global financial and security systems. Reduced cooperation with Western governments increased economic pressure. International lenders expressed concern. Media outlets questioned legitimacy. Yet domestically, many citizens interpreted Traoré's posture as defiance against a world that had long dictated Africa's boundaries without bearing Africa's consequences. From Traoré's perspective, Islam could not be treated as neutral decoration in this struggle. In regions where extremist groups also claimed religious justification, the state faced a dangerous paradox: abandon religion publicly and leave moral space to militants, or engage belief openly and risk foreign condemnation. Traoré chose the latter, framing Islam not as ideology, but as responsibility. This framing was shaped by recent history across the Sahel. In Mali, the military takeover in the year 2021 led to sanctions and diplomatic isolation. In Niger, the 2023 coup triggered similar reactions. In each case, Western governments emphasized democratic norms, while local populations emphasized security and survival. These patterns dominate African news narratives, but rarely capture the emotional reality on the ground. For Ibrahim Traoré, leadership meant confronting this imbalance directly. Islam, in his view, could not be reduced to ceremony or private conscience. It had to function as a stabilizing force, reinforcing accountability and shared sacrifice. Not because the state sought religious rule, but because the absence of moral structure had already proven catastrophic. This position explains why Traoré speaks with such intensity when discussing faith and power. In Burkina Faso, neutrality toward belief has never been neutral. It has often meant abandonment. And it is from this hardened reality formed by coups, withdrawals, and unresolved violence that Ibrahim Traoré enters our fictional conversation, carrying with him the full weight of Sahelian history, Africa news scrutiny, and a nation still searching for stability. But this was only one side of the story, because across the Atlantic, Islam was surviving inside a very different kind of pressure. When Ibrahim Traoré finished outlining his view of Islam and state power, the room fell quiet, not because Zohran Kwame Mamdani lacked a response, but because he understood the weight behind Traoré's words. This was not ideology spoken from a university podium. This was the voice of a leader shaped by collapse, conflict, and survival in Burkina Faso, a country that appears frequently in African news, yet is rarely understood beyond headlines. Traoré's challenge came sharply, almost surgically. From his perspective, Western systems do not reject Islam outright. They tolerate it conditionally. Faith is accepted only when it remains private, symbolic, and non-threatening to existing power structures. The moment religion begins to question economic dependency, military alignment, or geopolitical hierarchy, tolerance disappears. Traoré did not speak in abstractions. He referenced patterns that Mamdani could not deny. In Mali, after the military transition of the year 2021, sanctions arrived swiftly. In Niger, following the events of 2023, borders tightened, aid was frozen, and legitimacy was debated in foreign capitals rather than local streets. In each case, African news framed the crises as democratic backsliding. On the ground, however, citizens spoke of insecurity, broken promises, and exhaustion with external oversight that failed to deliver safety. This, Traoré argued, revealed a deeper truth. The West is comfortable with diversity only when diversity does not alter decision-making authority. Islam, like other belief systems, is welcome as identity, but not as influence. Mamdani felt the weight of this accusation personally. In New York politics, Islam exists in a constant state of translation. Every public statement is filtered through fear, shaped by post-September 11th memory. Advocacy for Palestinians invites accusations of extremism. Criticism of foreign policy triggers loyalty tests. Even silence can be interpreted as guilt. As a Muslim elected official in a secular democracy, Mamdani had learned restraint as a survival skill. His faith informed his values, housing justice, immigrant protections, social equity, but rarely his rhetoric. The system rewarded moderation and punished confrontation. Power, in America, was structural. It flowed through committees, donors, and institutions far removed from moral conviction. Traoré understood this and pressed further. He warned that representation without leverage becomes symbolism. Elections grant visibility, not control. Seats offer voice, not authority. Without access to the architecture of power, belief risks being reduced to branding. This was the climax of their exchange, not anger, not shouting, but an uncomfortable recognition that both men operated inside systems designed to constrain them, one through force and sanctions, the other through norms and narrative control. Outside the room, the world moved on. Headlines focused on speeches, votes, and diplomatic statements. Burkina Faso remained framed as unstable. Ibrahim Traoré was portrayed as controversial. Mamdani continued navigating the narrow path allowed to Muslim politicians in America. Yet inside that quiet space, something sharper had been revealed. That modern politics often permits faith only when it is silent and punishes it when it demands transformation. For older American viewers who have watched decades of African news, Middle East wars, and ideological shifts, this moment forces a deeper question. Is the global system truly neutral toward belief? or does it simply reward those who know how to hide it? And from that question, the consequences begin to unfold. The consequences of that unspoken exchange extend far beyond a single room or a single moment. They ripple outward into streets, institutions, and lives shaped by decisions made far above them. In Burkina Faso, the civil and political cost of redefining power through sovereignty and belief has been immediate, visible, and deeply personal. Under Ibrahim Traoré's leadership, the state began shifting its priorities away from external approval and toward internal control. This shift was not merely rhetorical, it affected security operations, diplomatic relationships, and economic policy. As Western military partnerships receded, local forces were expected to fill the vacuum. For ordinary citizens, this meant heightened mobilization, stricter discipline, and a renewed emphasis on national duty. In a country where daily life had already been destabilized by years of violence, these changes demanded resilience rather than comfort. Civil society felt the pressure quickly. Journalists, community leaders, and educators operated within tighter boundaries as the government emphasized unity over dissent. Supporters argued that cohesion was necessary to survive existential threats. Critics warned that concentration of authority risked silencing legitimate concerns. Both perspectives appeared repeatedly across African news, reflecting a broader debate about whether stability must come at the expense of openness. Economically, Burkina Faso faced mounting strain. Reduced cooperation with international financial institutions complicated access to credit and aid. Inflation pressed against households already struggling with displacement and insecurity. Yet for many citizens, hardship was framed as sacrifice rather than failure. Traoré's narrative resonated precisely because it acknowledged suffering instead of denying it. He spoke not of quick recovery, but of endurance, an approach that echoed deeply in communities accustomed to surviving without guarantees. The political consequences were equally complex. International legitimacy became contested terrain. Western governments questioned democratic norms. Regional alliances shifted. At the same time, Traoré's posture strengthened his image among populations who felt ignored by global decision-makers. In this sense, his leadership represented a broader Sahelian challenge to post-Cold War assumptions about governance and authority. Across the Atlantic, the consequences took a quieter but no less significant form. For Zohran Kwame Mamdani and politicians like him, the limits of acceptable discourse became clearer. Advocacy had to be measured, language had to be carefully chosen, faith could inspire policy, but never command it. This balancing act was not unique to Mamdani. It reflected a broader condition faced by Muslim Americans navigating civic life under persistent scrutiny. Here, power did not arrive through coups or sanctions, but through gatekeeping. Committee assignments, media framing, and donor confidence shaped what could be said and what had to remain implied. The cost was not imprisonment or exile, but dilution belief, expressed only in ways that reassured rather than challenged. These contrasting outcomes reveal a shared truth. Whether in Burkina Faso or the United States, systems respond decisively when belief approaches the center of power. The response may be overt, as in sanctions and isolation, or subtle, as in narrative containment. But the effect is the same. Faith is permitted until it threatens structure. For those who follow African news closely, this pattern is familiar. It repeats across borders, ideologies, and generations. The question is not whether consequences exist, but who is expected to bear them. And as these consequences settle into daily life, a deeper realization emerges. Power is rarely neutral, and belief is rarely free. From an American vantage point, the contrast between Ibrahim Traoré and Zohran Kwame Mamdani reveals something deeply uncomfortable about how power is interpreted across the world. In the United States, belief is protected as a right, but tightly constrained as a force. Faith may guide private conscience, but it is expected to dissolve quietly when it approaches national interest, military policy, or economic hierarchy. This expectation shapes how Americans consume African news, often without realizing it. When Burkina Faso appears in U.S. media, the framing is predictable. Instability, coups, extremism. Rarely does coverage pause to examine why sovereignty has become such an urgent demand, or why leaders like Ibrahim Traoré resonate with populations exhausted by externally defined solutions. For American audiences raised on the promise of democratic process, the assumption is simple: legitimacy flows from elections alone. But in regions where elections fail to deliver safety, legitimacy has been redefined through survival. This is where the American lens struggles. U.S. foreign policy institutions developed during the Cold War and refined after September 11th are designed to prioritize predictability. Governments that disrupt existing alliances, question financial frameworks, or reject military partnerships are viewed as risks. Faith becomes suspect when it reinforces that disruption. Islam, in this context, is not evaluated theologically, but strategically. IBRAHIM Traoré's rise challenges that logic. His leadership in Burkina Faso is not framed around religious law, yet his moral language unsettles Western observers because it resists compartmentalization. In American discourse, belief is expected to remain invisible at the level of power. Traoré refuses that separation, and the response has been swift: skepticism, pressure, and isolation. These reactions dominate African news headlines, reinforcing a narrative of danger rather than context. For American Muslims, this global pattern is not abstract. It echoes domestically. Mamdani's experience reflects how political participation is encouraged, but only within defined boundaries. Faith-inspired values are welcome when they align with progressive causes, but faith-driven critiques of global power structures trigger discomfort. The system rewards harmony, not challenge. Older Americans, particularly those who have lived through decades of geopolitical shifts, may recognize this contradiction. The United States champions freedom of belief abroad, yet reacts defensively when belief informs resistance. This tension is not new. It appeared during decolonization, resurfaced during the War on Terror, and now defines how Africa is interpreted in the 21st century. Globally, the divide is widening. In parts of Africa, the Middle East, and Asia, leaders are questioning whether integration into Western-led systems truly delivers dignity. In response, Western institutions tighten standards, emphasizing order over reform. This cycle reinforces mistrust on both sides. Through this lens, IBRAHIM Traoré becomes more than a regional figure. He represents a challenge to the idea that power must be sanitized of belief to be legitimate. Whether one agrees with his methods or not, his presence forces a reckoning, especially for American viewers accustomed to separating faith from authority. As African news continues to shape perception, the deeper question remains unresolved. Can global power structures accommodate belief without fear? Or will faith always be tolerated only at the margins? That question sets the stage for what comes next, an unexpected shift that alters the balance Traoré's critics believed was fixed. What followed was not a dramatic announcement, nor a sudden reversal that dominated headlines. It was quieter and therefore more consequential. While critics focused on sanctions, isolation, and uncertainty, a different reality began to take shape beneath the surface, one that altered how IBRAHIM Traoré was perceived both inside Burkina Faso and across the broader African news landscape. The turning point did not come from speeches at international forums. It emerged from internal recalibration. In the months following intensified external pressure, the Traoré administration redirected its emphasis toward local capacity, security coordination, regional alliances, and civic mobilization. These efforts were imperfect and often strained, but they signaled something many had not expected: endurance. Across several Sahelian states, informal cooperation increased. Intelligence sharing among neighbors expanded quietly. Community defense structures, controversial yet rooted in local legitimacy, played a growing role in stabilizing contested areas. For citizens accustomed to abandonment, this shift mattered more than international approval. In villages once written off in Africa, news reports as lost causes, daily routines began to re-emerge. Markets reopened cautiously. Schools resumed in limited form. Normalcy, however fragile, carried weight. This is where the narrative shifted. For years, Western analysis assumed that leaders like Traoré would either collapse under pressure or conform under necessity. Neither happened quickly. Instead, IBRAHIM Traoré adapted. He reframed legitimacy away from recognition and toward responsibility. His message evolved not louder, but steadier. Islam remained present, not as decree, but as moral anchoring. Faith was not imposed, it was invoked as shared memory, discipline, and restraint. Unexpectedly, this approach began to resonate beyond borders. Young Africans, disillusioned with inherited political models, shared Traoré's speeches widely, not because they sought religious governance, but because they recognized defiance rooted in dignity. Within African news circles, tone shifted subtly from dismissal to curiosity. Analysts began asking not whether Traoré would fail, but how long his model could persist. This recalibration unsettled critics. Power had not changed hands, but perception had. Traoré was no longer framed solely as a transitional figure. He was becoming symbolic, not through spectacle, but through consistency. In global politics, symbolism often precedes influence. For Zohran Kwame Mamdani, observing from a distance, this twist carried a different lesson. It revealed that power does not always announce itself through institutions alone. Sometimes it consolidates through patience, narrative, and the willingness to absorb cost. In American politics, where immediate results and optics dominate, such endurance is rare, the contrast sharpened. The deeper twist, however, lay in what Traoré did not do. He did not declare religious authority. He did not rewrite doctrine. He did not claim divine mandate. Instead, he allowed belief to operate as an internal compass rather than external command. This distinction mattered. It complicated the simplistic binary often presented in African news, secular reformer versus religious strongman. By refusing to fit neatly into either category, IBRAHIM Traoré disrupted the script. For American audiences, especially those over 40 who have witnessed cycles of rise and collapse, this moment invites reconsideration. Power is not always loud, reform is not always linear, and belief, when woven carefully into governance, can function without domination. The twist, then, is not triumph. It is survival with intention, and that survival redefines the question entirely. The issue is no longer whether Traoré can hold power. It is whether global systems are prepared to recognize forms of legitimacy that do not mirror their own. With that realization, the conversation reaches its final threshold, not toward certainty, but toward meaning. In the end, there was no winner in that imagined room. No concession, no conversion, only clarity. IBRAHIM Traoré returned to Burkina Faso, carrying the weight of a nation that has learned to survive without permission. Zohran Kwame Mamdani returned to New York, navigating a democracy that celebrates belief in principle but limits it in practice. Both men remained faithful, both remained constrained, and both revealed something essential about our time. This story is not about Islam alone. It is about power, who defines it, who controls it, and who is allowed to challenge it. In the world of African news, leaders like IBRAHIM Traoré are often reduced to instability and risk. Yet beneath those labels lies a deeper truth. Millions of people are demanding dignity before approval, sovereignty before comfort, and meaning before recognition. Traoré's words linger not because they promise certainty, but because they refuse submission. We did not ask permission to be free. We stood up and claimed it. For Americans who have lived through decades of global change, this moment matters. It asks whether freedom is still respected when it does not follow familiar rules. If the spirit of IBRAHIM Traoré resonates with you, share this story. If you believe truth matters more than headlines, subscribe and stay with us. And if you think the future of Burkina Faso and of Africa itself deserves deeper understanding, join the conversation. History is not finished speaking.